Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tuesdays for Teachers, staying on track and hitting the marks. I'm Bonnie Goonan, and with me today are Daphne Atkinson and Debbie Fawcett from the GED Testing Service, Susan Pittman, my business partner, and well over 300 of you out there who were thrilled to have participating in this very first Tuesdays for Teachers in 2016. So, we decided that the first one for this 2016 should really look at some of the new things that have come from GED Testing Service. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to talk briefly about the recalibration of the GED test scores and talk about the changes on GED Social Studies. We're also going to discuss issues and concerns in the classroom in implementing these changes, and we definitely want to explore ways to keep students on track for success. But before I turn it over to Daphne, please note that under the handouts, if you've not had the opportunity to download them yet, you will see the technical assistance paper for GED test performance standards, which we will be referring to today, and you'll also see a copy of the webinar. So you'll want to download those both as we go through. So having said that, Daphne, give us a little bit of an update on the GED test and that thing called recalibration.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, and I'd like to add my welcome to now almost 400 of you out there. It's a great thing to see the level of interest in the program. We want to talk a little bit about the exciting time that has now occurred. We have had a lot of outpouring of excitement. We've had, I personally have taken some calls from parents who didn't believe that this could be happening, but it actually is. So why is this happening now? With 18 months of data, we're able to have a much clearer, much more detailed picture of adult learners' knowledge across the entire spectrum, not just a subset of the spectrum of the typical high school graduating class. And as all of you know, there are some students who barely meet the minimum graduation requirements. There are others that are distinctly above that, but maybe not yet at career and college ready. Some students are clearly demonstrating that they do have college readiness skills, and there are still others that are actually co-enrolled and are earning college credit while in high school. So there's a wide spectrum of ability levels represented in today's typical high school. So let's just take a quick look at what the performance levels were before and what they have become, they've evolved to now. Before, we had a category called below passing that was 100 to 149. We had the passing cut score beginning at 150 and running to 169. And then 170 to 200 was GED with honors. In the new world, we have 4 performance levels instead of 3. High school equivalency, and running to 164, with GED College Ready beginning at 165 and running to 174. And then for those who achieve 175 in terms of scale score points to 200, we have GED College Ready plus credit. We feel that this new range best reflects the entire range of today's high school graduates. So what we have attempted to create in recalibrating the passing score is to ensure that the high school equivalency passing score really reflects what today's high school graduates and current graduation standards are. a higher percentage of GED grads are attending post-secondary than ever before. We have done a national data match, and enrollment in post-secondary is distinctly up. One of the things we'll be looking in the longitudinal studies that we have planned is to see whether this also translates into an impact on completion rates. And not only do we have anecdotes from you in the field, but as well as some data from several states that demonstrate that GED grads are, at the very least, performing on par with and often far better than high school graduates when entering post-secondary education, which is great news for not only an adult learner, but the instructor staff that has spent a lot of time and invested a lot of hard work in preparing them. And I think it raises the bar on what the value ultimately of the credential is. So what does this really mean for test takers? Since many adults that tested beginning with the inception of the new test on January 1st, 2014, many of those folks will be immediately eligible for a GED credential. Now, when we say immediately eligible, we do not mean that the credential is in the mail to them yet. We'll talk about what the implementation schedule looks like in a second. I want to remind you that the test remains fully aligned to state college and career readiness standards. The same things that we have been, that Bonnie, Susan, Debbie, and I and others have been out talking to you about, the importance of critical thinking and problem solving, none of that has gone away. And so it's still important for us to be modeling and developing students' skills and expertise with those skills. And those are the keys ultimately to the jobs that our test takers tell us they want and to further training and education. What is an important benefit is this program will now be much more inclusive of those who could benefit both from the GED program and the credential. And, you know, to reiterate the point I made earlier, the scores represent the broader range of a high school graduating class. In essence, as a high school equivalency program, we are replicating the environment and the range of student abilities that you would find in a typical high school graduating class.
So as we go along, Daphne, I'm sure folks may have some questions. So I'm just going to say, please, if you do have questions, as Daphne's speaking about the new scores and what's occurring, if you will, please type them into your question box because we will be answering questions both as we go and at the end of this webinar. So don't forget that you do have that access. So Daphne, on to College Ready and College Ready Plus Credit.
Well, you know, it's very easy for us to lose sight of the fact that this recalibration impacted one end of the continuum, but I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that it also impacted test takers who are operating at the upper end of the skill continuum. And it's really important to focus on that. So that's what we're going to transition to right now. So we've got these two additional passing levels, GED College Ready, a new score level for the ACE credit recommendation, and this is envisioned to provide an opportunity for test takers, successful test takers that score in this range to bypass developmental education and placement exams. And we have the GED Ready GED College Ready Plus credit, try saying that 3 times fast, a new level where students may be eligible for up to 10 college credit hours. And the breakdown of that would be 3 in math, 3 in social studies, 3 in science, and 1 in English / humanities. So this is an important step forward for the GED program, particularly those test takers and students who are interested in pursuing post-secondary. One of the things that a lot of the early research done when GED testing service was part of the American Council on Education demonstrated that students often got lost in developmental education and to the detriment of moving forward and completing the degree program, actually enrolling in credit bearing, much less completing a degree program. So let's talk first about what the ACE credit recommendation actually is. First of all, I want to make sure that folks know that ACE's credit recommendation service has been around for 40 plus years and has a pretty extensive network of colleges who use components of the credit program. And there'll be more information available both to students and to you as educators in March as this program gets rolling. And what it was designed to do was to assist students in assessing academic credit for non-traditional forms of training, which our adult learners often excel at. And it includes reviews to determine equivalency, and it provides recommendations to member organizations, the colleges and universities. Okay, so to the question that do students automatically earn credit? Well, there's a process, like there are for most things. Students will be able to download an expanded transcript of the recommendation and provide information to colleges. And ultimately, we want to make sure we emphasize this, ultimately, the colleges are going to make the determination on need for further placement tests, awarding of credit, etc. Again, this is a recommendation, and a lot of it is going to be subject to the academic institution's acceptance of those recommendations. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the timing and implementation behind the recalibration. For most states, we made some information broadly available to both test takers, the adult ed community, on January 26th. That was kind of a red letter day. Students have been, for those states that accepted the recommendation within the first couple of days, their students have been notified of a status change. And so one of the things that we wanted to make sure is why the early announcement when we weren't going to actually be ready to implement on March 1st, it was really to help folks manage things like unnecessary retesting in the interim period. So what happens next? There will be system implementation, and behind the scenes, where none of us can see, our colleagues, Bonnie, can I have you flip back one, please? Behind the scenes, where none of us can really see, there's a lot of systems work being done so that when the new scoring becomes law, as it were, that everything operates smoothly. States use multiple vendors. Some states manage their own data, and there are changes to the system that need to be made. And an important add-on, not all jurisdictions are going to be ready on that single date, but March 1st is a red letter day in terms of our pushing out the new score information to states, and it will be the point in time where impacted test takers will actually see the changes in my GED. Okay, so we also have we had a lot of positive reception to the recommendation. However, there are some states that are going to need additional time for state approvals and or rule changes. Every state is kind of unique in how things are set up, and on occasion, even if there isn't a rule change, board approval is needed. Many of the jurisdictions involved anticipate being able to implement in the March-April timeframe for the revision to the passing score. There are others who want to have a more robust discussion and a weighing of the recommendation for retroactive scoring. And that may be an aspect of the program that may take a little bit more time for state approval in some jurisdictions. And the most important link to information on this slide is that URL that says check webpage for updates. That is where you'll see a roll call of the states and where they stand in terms of adopting one or both aspects of the recommendation. So I did say in a halfway joking way that students will, it doesn't mean that students will immediately be getting their credential in the mail, but they will get an email about their status change immediately. But in these intervening weeks since January 26th, they haven't yet seen the changes on GED.com. Nor, I want to make sure I emphasize, will students get credentials or transcripts until after March 1st. There are some state timelines that are going to take a few weeks beyond March 1st, and there are some states that may provide credentials and transcripts earlier. So it is truly a state-by-state picture in terms of how quickly students are going to see their credentials. I want to make sure that for those, because someone will, or a number of someones will ask, we do have a system in place for those who are new passers to request a formal verification letter if they need one. Either from an employer or from an educational institution. We do have a process, and there are a couple of slides from now we'll talk about what that is.
Well, Daphne, just a couple things that we have had a couple questions that came in, and so I think what we can do is just kind of reiterate a couple of things that you've said.
Okay.
One is that, yes, if a student passed one of the tests back in 2014, or they took it and they scored 145, then that passing score will now be granted retroactively as long as that state approves that.
That is correct.
Okay,
That is
and
absolutely
that's one of the things that I think in your reference to the website, it's really important that people keep up with all of those things. We do have some questions about some specific states, and so that information will be forthcoming, but I do know, just as a comment, I did receive something today from Michigan that they are accepting, and that was one of our questions, will Michigan accept this new calibration? And they just announced today that they would. So that's a really good positive that we see. The other thing comes in, Daphne, really about credit. We have a number of different questions that have come in to say, well, which colleges or institutions are granting credit? And I think, if I remember what you said correctly, that it is a college by college decision. The recommendation was made by the ACE credit recommendation, and so now really it is up to those individual colleges and universities to determine if they will do that,
That
correct?
is absolutely correct. And please understand it's not for naught that we use the word, and you saw the words on the slide, recommendation. It is not a mandate, it is a recommendation. And obviously a college, either at the system, a college system or at the individual institution level, will determine whether it does or does not accept that. The hope is, because this comes from a reputable organization that has been in this business of granting credit, and there's an extensive network of post-secondary institutions that the adoption process, in part or as a whole, will be pretty smooth. But a lot of institutions are currently studying it, and so it's going to be a bit of a while before the process smooths itself out and it becomes completely transparent as to who is and who is not inclined to accept this recommendation. But it will be made at the institution level. But the hope is that they will see it as a tremendous positive, as a vote of confidence in the test taker student's skill to navigate post-secondary successfully and effectively.
So I think from that standpoint, as we're all listening today, that this is a real positive that's coming through, and the system just has to work through. So, it is something that will be something we'll be watching for in our respective states to see what all is going on and how those recommendations are coming. But I think, again, Daphne, it's just such a positive thing, because we do know that while a lot of students coming through the program just want that high school credential, we also know, if I'm correct, it was like 60+% really want to pursue post-secondary.
That's correct. That is exactly in the in the anonymity of surveys. They are perfectly willing to tell us what their hopes and dreams are, and this certainly could give a student a leg up on not falling through the cracks in developmental ed and never making it to credit bearing. It certainly begins to address that. And I think that for students who are interested in post-secondary, it gives them a much needed vote of confidence that they can achieve. And I think
Absolutely.
that's important. I think
I
that's
think you're absolutely right. That is important. And just as we get ready to move into this content area, I know that there are a number of other questions that are out there, and hopefully we'll be able to answer more of those as we go through. But one thing to keep in mind is that there is a list. There's information on the GED Testing Service website that talks about where states are in the process, and they're constantly updating that. So please, if those of you who are attending today, make sure you check that out on a regular basis to see where people are in the process, because we're watching all of these students. Bonnie and I just had an opportunity. We were just in Kentucky last week, and we had some teachers sharing with us just how absolutely thrilled some students were that they had gotten their notification that one last content area, they had passed it, and they were ready to get that credential. So it's such a great thing. And Daphne, we really appreciate your explanations and going through and kind of walking us through this process and how this has worked. So I know we're going to have a whole bunch more questions for you as
well.
we go to that question time frame, but at the same time, I think it's just such a positive thing that we see coming out from these areas.
Yes, I would agree, and it's a really exciting. It's an exciting time. I think, students, for instructors, and for GED testing service to be able, to really come together about something that is truly, I think, a benefit to adult learners. And so I'm really excited to be part of this. I am going to be on the phone and on the webinar, so we'll get to, as you said, Susan, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can before we conclude today.
Fantastic. So in the meantime, Bonnie, we have a content area change.
We do. We are saying a fond goodbye to the social studies extended response because it is more than just the scores that were looked at as the recalibration process was completed. And so an additional enhancement to it is the fact that the social studies extended response will be taken away on March 1st, 2016. And there were some really good reasons for that. First of all, the reason, probably as far as I'm concerned, one of the major reasons was the fact that social studies extended response was so well correlated with RLA. When we looked at the writing samples, traits 2 and 3 were exactly the same from RLA to social studies. They were measuring the same skills. And even trait 1 was so similar that the social studies extended response really didn't provide sufficient additional measurement information to be kept in. So for all of us, as our students click into that social studies test on March 1st and after, you will need to let them know that, first of all, their testing time will be reduced by 20 minutes. It will now be a 70-minute test. The extended response will no longer be there. However, it really, just because the extended response is removed does not mean that the rest of the test is not as rigorous as it was, because it will continue to be aligned to college career readiness skills. It will continue to be a very rigorous test that will assess those 4 content areas. So, for those of you who are wondering, will civics and government continue to be an important part of the test? Yes, it will. In fact, Susan and I were just talking about enduring issues, and although not directly stated anywhere, I can't think of how students could really understand some primary source documents if they didn't understand things like the Bill of Rights. So when you're looking at the performance level descriptors, as we nicely say, the stuff to teach, you'll notice that the same performance level descriptors are there. The same skills for the high impact indicators are there. And what we really want to make sure as we go forward is that we stay on track with our students, because it's one thing to say that there's a score difference. It's one thing to say that social studies extended response is not there, but what does that really mean for content in our classroom? So Susan, how in the world are we going to stay on track?
Well, there are a couple of things that we have to keep in mind. One is, just because there was a change in the score range, it doesn't mean that the content has changed. The content is still there. The test, whether you're looking at mathematics and mathematical reasoning, and you're looking at the percentage of algebra, that hasn't changed any. If we're looking at social studies, that, just as you said, civics and government makes up a large part of that test, so you can't just discount those. Not only that, but we tend to maybe think sometimes about how the writing was really kind of the higher order piece, but that's not all. The students are reading and they're having to extract information in order to be able to answer different types of questions. And when it comes to mathematical reasoning, they're having to interpret problems and solve them. And so those skills are still going to be needed there. And our teaching objectives have not changed. We still need to maintain that rigor that we have been doing. Now is not that time to say, whew, well, I think I can take a little break here. No, we really don't want to take a break. We want to make sure that our students are achieving at the level that we know they can achieve. So let's take a look, Bonnie, because one thing has changed, and that's the performance level descriptors. Because remember, we used to have 3 of these levels, and now we have 4. And make sure one of the documents that each of you pull down and for this particular webinar actually does show you those revised performance level descriptors. But we want to make sure that our students, as they're going through, they're able to hit that level 2 where they pass and they have that high school equivalency. That's that score range now from 145 to 164. But you know, we also want to think beyond that, and we really want to take a look at 2 different areas. One, we need to take a close look at level 1, because those students who are scoring within that range, we want to be able to help lift them up and get them to level 2. But how do we do that if we're not real sure what they're missing along the way? And then finally, we want to make sure that we're moving on to that level 2. Now, I will tell you, in that technical guide that you have, you may need to pull out a magnifying glass because the print is very small. But at the same time, if you print on legal paper, then you'll be able to really take a look at each one of those different areas. So, Bonnie, let's talk a little bit as we look at level 1 here and moving on to that next slide. The thing that we've realized, and this comes from a lot of research that the GED testing service has done over the past 18 months, and especially as they were looking at those high impact indicators, is that when it comes to level 1, those students who are, you know, just missing the cutoff or are a little bit lower, they have some skills. But the problem is that they're not consistent in how they apply them. So maybe in one type of source text, they may be able to identify certain types of things, but when it comes to another, they just can't. So what do we have to do as we're working with those level 1s to bring them up to level 2? We really have to take a look at practicing those skills with students with a wide range of materials. We need to look at how we cross content areas. That third bullet, that's been something that Bonnie and I have worked with a lot of teachers across the country, and that's about building those reading skills. And the reading skills are essential not just for RLA, but mathematics as well. Sometimes it's the reading that gets in the way of students being able to solve a problem. They may know how to do the math, but they can't interpret the problem appropriately. But we also know that when it comes to our students in mathematics, mathematics has always been that problem child with our students, is that we have to work on building that foundation of working with algebraic expressions and equations. It's just essential that we begin helping students get that confidence level that they need to not be afraid of algebra, because they really shouldn't. So we've got some work to do at our level 1s, but we know based on what we've seen from the performance level descriptors how we can make that move. So Bonnie, if we can work with the level 1s and get them up to that level 2, what is it we should be doing with those level 2s right before they get in there to test?
Well, Susan, as we looked through the PLDs, we noticed that many of the skills from level 1 to level 2 do remain the same, but the types of materials that students are going to encounter on the test will increase in rigor. So as we look at level 2, even if the level descriptor is similar, we must incorporate more rigorous materials into our classrooms. And we all know those lovely 5 W's and an H, very basic reading strategy, which works very well at level 1. However, when we get to level 2, we want our students to make higher order thinking skills as they read. We want them to be able to make inferences and draw conclusions. We want them to be able to analyze and evaluate, not summarize materials. And of course, at level 2, math is going to continue to build. Even with the recalibration, our students still need strong geometric and algebraic reasoning skills to get those levels in level 2. And it's not just about doing some problems on a page, but rather focusing on those real-world mathematical problem-solving skills. Because if they can't translate the words of a problem into those mathematical expressions or equations, then they can't answer the questions. And you know, you and I have laughingly said always that we don't remember the last time we did a page of computation. Yet our life is filled with word problems, with real-world application of math. But it's more than just the technology-enhanced items, because although extended response may have been removed from social studies, we still have extended responses in RLA and in science. Think about in science, we have two short answers, one that deals with experimental design, and then one that deals with whether students can make those connections between what they've read, analyzing and evaluating that text, and answering a short answer. And of course in RLA, as students are reading source texts, creating an argumentative style of writing, identifying the evidence, writing claims, all the skills that we use all the time in daily life, those have not gone away. And we really want our students to do better than marginal writing for both RLA and science. We want them to be able to create writing samples that show that they are effective writers, because that's so important in real-world situations as well as on this test. And then we also, although we've not talked about it a lot, we have to be able to have our students incorporate visual and graphic literacy into their world, because there continue to be a lot of graphics on this test. In fact, it's more than just charts and tables. Our students need to be able to interpret such things as historical photographs or editorial cartoons, diagrams, maps. We live in a visual world. Everything we look at has a lot of visual or graphic literacy, and so it's really the time that we need to help our students build those skills so that they can master those skills at level 2 and obtain their credential. So levels 1 and 2 we really need to look at strongly, and of course we don't want to forget levels 3 and 4. As an instructor, we want to look at what kinds of skills will get our students those next levels, because as Daphne said, many of our students dream of going on to post-secondary ed, and they need those skills in order to be successful and to bypass those developmental ed courses. But Susan, we also talked once upon a time about HIIs. Are those still there for us?
Oh, yes. Well, we can't forget about them. We just have to remember now, what was that HII? Oh, high impact indicators. And what are those things? Well, we had an opportunity to share some of that information with you, and I will say that that webinar was archived. But it is all about where can we focus our energies to make sure that we're hitting the areas that students really need. And I think, Bonnie, when you and I have talked about it, one of the things that we like best is that application piece. It describes what to look for in student work, because these are areas that if we pay attention to them can really make a difference in our students' score. Quite often these are the types of things that we don't do as much work in as maybe we should, but we can really take those and build kind of relationships across different content areas. Let's face it, all of us in adult ed know that we have a limited amount of time with our students. And so we've got to figure out how we can set up an instructional plan that's going to hit as many skills as possible, but it's going to be doing it in multiple ways, so that students see that, oh, if I learn this skill here, it's not just about using it here. I can use it in other places. And I think all of us appreciate it when we can do more with the things that we're learning. And so let's take a look at what we mean kind of by relationships, because I think maybe this gives a little bit better overall view of it. If we take a look at those high impact indicators, we can see that, okay, in RLA, one of those is that our students need to be able to sequence events. They need to put things in the correct order. Well, sounds like a workplace skill to me as well, but it's not just something that we would teach students how to do that and just hope for RLA and that's it, but that really falls into everything else that we're doing on this test. In social studies, it's about some kind of chronological structure, or how there are different steps in a process. If you take a look at science, certain, if we're going to do a scientific design, or we're going to look at hypothesis, there's a sequence to how that occurs. So if our students learn it in one area, they're applying it to the other. And then when we get to mathematics, our students, they don't always realize that, there's a process. It's not just about diving into a problem and pulling out all the numbers. It's about determining, where do I go? How do I set up that plan to solve that problem? And what are going to be my steps? What's going to make a difference as I move through? So that tells you how just this one item, this one skill set, can then go over into all these different content areas. And that's where we begin to really maximize for students their time that they spend with us.
But Susan, there's another one that we also had covered, and I think this one is equally important, and it's to evaluate the relevance and sufficiency of evidence offered in support of a claim, primarily measured with informational text. Boy, that sounds like the extended response in RLA to me. And I can teach those skills very well in RLA, but I can also transfer them, because when I look at social studies, even not looking at an extended response, I think of the types of technology-enhanced items, and I know that my students are going to have to read primary or secondary sources, and they are going to have to determine central ideas. They are going to have to identify the different types of evidence or conclusions that they get from those sources. But I can also take evidence over to science, both in the short answers and the technology-enhanced items, where students need to, again, find the evidence and see whether that evidence supports conclusions, whether that evidence supports theories, or whether the reverse happens, whether conclusions or theories can be challenged by some specific data or evidence. And we don't want to leave out math, because I'm not sure I could solve a problem unless I knew what evidence that word problem was giving me. Sometimes we call it relevant information or relevant data, and of course, along with that type of evidence, there's also irrelevant data. And we need to not forget that evidence is more than facts or stats. It can also be emotional appeals, or, oh gosh, expert opinions. I hear from the expert, or maybe sometimes evidence is just that logical information. So there again, as an instructor, evidence is everywhere, not only when I teach RLA, but when I transfer finding evidence to the other academic areas. So it looks to me like high impact indicators have not gone anywhere, but even with the recalibration, they have continued to be an important part of our instructional world. So how are we going to stay on track to hit those marks? Well, first of all, as an instructor, I would definitely strongly advise all of us to go out and review those revised PLDs, because there have been some changes. Susan and I laid out the originals and the revised ones and really took a look at where are the differences, where are the similarities, so that we can ensure that what we're teaching in our classes is what we should be teaching. And as we've hit on throughout this, we want to maintain the rigor, because right now our students are doing very well with the rigorous instruction that we're all providing. We're seeing a lot of students getting that 145 on up. Remember, when we were looking at some stats earlier last year, we saw a large percentage of students who were in that 145 to 149 range, and of course a larger percentage in that 150 on up. But if we don't maintain the rigor, then our students also sit back and may not get the score that they need to get. Of course, we want to take advantage of all the resources that are out there, taking a look at those high-impact indicators and how we can use them across the content areas, and how we can help our students apply those skills in multiple ways and in a variety of contexts, including real-world situations. We really want to make sure that our students continue to be focused on the goal, which is that high school credential. And Susan was talking about some of the things that we've been hearing in the field, and one of those things can be just that little bit of fear that students have. We'll share one last story with that, and it was a teacher who said that he had the student who continued to not pass the math. You know, he was looking at the 144 and the 143 and just everywhere but hitting that 150. And he said, I was amazed. As soon as a student, he said, I swear, as soon as a student found out that she only needed the 145, she said, I think I can do that. In she went to take the test, and she got a 150. He said something that she probably wouldn't have gotten, but that positive attitude of saying, yes, I can. And that's what we want to keep going for in the classroom. So as we go forward with 2016, as Susan said, there is an archive of all the webinar series that we've done, but we're not done with the webinars. We have many more planned for this year, and so we'll talk about those in just a moment. But don't forget that the ones that are archived at GED Testing Service under For the Educator, and they provide you not only with the recorded presentation, but also the slideshow document and the resources that we've been providing throughout the time we've been doing these. So I look at this one, Susan, close reading. I don't think close reading has gone away. It continues to be an integral part of all of these tests that students are going to have to take.
And
So,
Bonnie, having said that, I'm going to take just a minute, because as we've gone through a couple of things, there have been a couple questions that popped up along the way, and that deal with some of the things we talked about in this. And one of them comes back to that social studies and the extended response. And so we had a question in here. We just want to make sure that everybody understands that as of March 1, there will no longer be an extended response on the social studies test. This is not about states accepting it or not. It's just it will be removed from the test, because that's been one of the concerns. And students do not have to go back and test again if they've already received that 145, because that's retroactive as long as the state has approved that. So just a couple of little things there for some concerns in terms of making sure that people understand that, you know, if you have a student who's taking the social studies test this week and, you know, they score 145, then they're good, you know, as long as that individual state has gone ahead and put that information in. And, you know, some of our students are doing just fine in writing, and again, we know that within social studies, the extended response represented only about 18 to 20% of the final score, so it wasn't something that was that they had to do and had to achieve a certain score in order to pass. So, so keep those in mind. But if a student has already scored at 145 and the states have already approved those recalibration of the scores, then they're good to go. I noticed in the chat box that we have the URL to show you where to go to see the status of each one of the states that's out there, and where they are in the process and in changing those cut scores. So just wanted to go ahead while we had been working on some of the content to talk about some of those pieces.
And Susan, just while we are talking about that, the revised PLDs are part of the handout that you have under the handouts. The revised PLDs will be replaced, but you know that sometimes on a website there's lots of things to do to get that changed. So yes, they'll get changed, but for today, you have access. If you'll download that GED Test Performance Standards document, it's in the back. So that's
Bonnie,
where it is.
could you go ahead and pull that up, because I know you have it on your computer, just so they see what it looks like in case they haven't opened that yet.
And you know, it will be actually posted to the website the first week in March, but as Bonnie and Susan are saying, it's available to you right now in that second handout that we provided as part of the webinar document.
So I will go to the back of this document. This is a great document, so much information here that provides all of us with those basics, and it will take a while for it to go to the back. So give it just a moment. It's the joy of technology, Susan.
Well, sometimes it depends on the weather and the speed of your downloads.
That's
And
true, and right now
how fast everything's going. So,
I was going to say,
you need to get to attachment C.
yeah, if you can go to page, once you get to page 15.
Because the document actually gives people the originals, the original ones and the revised ones. So they'll have access to both in that document.
So
you should be seeing it now.
Yeah, you should be seeing
Correct.
this
Attachment
particular
C.
one at this point, and you can see it's the chart that has the 4 content areas across the board. Bonnie has pulled up at this point level 1, which is 100 to 144, and then as she moves through, what you'll be able to see is the level 2, and then on into level 3 and level 4. So that should really give you some indication, but you know, just a little reading for your evening enjoyment tonight, you know, as you go through and kind of look through the different things and see where we are in the program and where we need to be. I think, Bonnie, that's the big deal for us is are we doing in the classroom what we need to be doing to make sure our students have the greatest measure of success?
Definitely, and I know that we have lots of questions, so we did want to leave a little extra time today so that the questions could be answered. And FYI, we are over 500 people. Yay!
Yes, we are.
So we're going to go back to the PowerPoint, and let's go ahead and open it up to questions.
Okay, great. So there were a number of questions that came in, and I'll start off in the order that they were entered. The first one is, can a student who took the test in Spanish get credit for college?
And I think that one we would have to go to Daphne. Daphne, have there been any, the discussions that they did with the ACE credit recommendation, did that apply to the Spanish version as well as English, or just the English?
You know, I'm going to have to follow up on that. I would like to say that it would apply to both because the score range applies to both. But let me check that out before we confirm that.
Okay, so the one thing now, keep in mind that the college credit, and I really want to make sure people are very understanding of this, that college credit just because a student has earned at that level does not guarantee when they walk in the door of a given institution that they will be given those credits. It is a recommendation from the American Council on Education's credit recommendation group that that colleges and universities, other post-secondary institutions, consider that. So it's not an absolute, but what we hope is that in the future, moving forward, that we're going to see people who are, or see colleges and institutions that when they see college credit, you know, college ready plus credit, they're going to be able to award that to students. It is not a guarantee, but it is a recommendation. So make sure that you keep that in mind.
Right, and
And Susan,
that's also conveyed to students as well, that it is not a given at this point. And you know, like we've been saying throughout the webinar, we definitely hope that, and we have great hopes, I might add, that many institutions will adopt this either in whole or in part. But it is going to be on an institution by institution or a system by system basis that decision is made. And so we want to make sure, as Bonnie and Susan have both been saying, we want to make sure that you take away from this that this is a recommendation subject to being adopted by colleges and universities. And one of the big things is, you know, will be for them is how they operationalize it. What's the process? And, you know, they are just beginning the process in many instances of looking at that now. So it is not a full-blown, you know, ready-to-go program. It is a feature that we hope will gain traction as the year wears on.
And that's
Daphne, this is Debbie. The one thing I'd add to that is I think it was very promising to me to understand that there are hundreds of colleges that are already a part of the ACE credit program and have a history of looking and accepting some of these recommendations. So I think that's the encouraging news. It's not like this is the first time this has ever been done. It's a very regular process that the colleges in this network have been a part of over many years. So we are adding our recommendation to similar types of recommendations that come from other arenas, other coursework, other programs.
That's right. Thank you, Debbie.
and just to add to that one other thing, because we had a couple questions of whether students need to register as before they take the test as being college ready, and no. It's the same test because remember this test assesses more than the skills at a high school credential level.
Right. I mean, if they score in the range, they'll be able to have access to the information and the process once they achieve the score that puts them in the range.
Okay, good. Next question.
Sure, and that's right, Bonnie. There was one question that came in about whether or not there was a sign-up process to take the test as college ready. So I'll go ahead and remove that. So this is sort of a two-piece question. A lot of questions came in about the how will they know if the states have accepted the new scoring and will they be updated? And then I had several questions come in about California and if there's any updates on whether or not California will adopt the new standards.
We happen to have a California lady, yes.
Okay, so are we going to ask
I'm almost good to vote in California these days. Yeah, no, I am the state relationship manager for California. This is Debbie. And we have provided information to the California Department of Education. They have placed an agenda item on their agenda for their March board meeting. I have not seen the recommendation that the department will offer to the board. We certainly hope it will be a favorable recommendation to accept the score changes. I expect some action to be taken just based on the fact that they had asked us to be there to explain the recalibration of scores at the March board meeting. so we should have some, we'll know the recommendation and the outcome of the board's vote, I think. We expect it at the March meeting, and that's all I can tell you for right now. We do know there, that we certainly are looking forward and hopeful for a positive or a recommendation to approve the change. And our colleagues in the Department of Ed have worked very closely with us. We provided them the information. It was a very collaborative process, and we'll just see what happens before the board meeting in March.
Okay, great. Thanks, Debbie. Another, the second piece of that question, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Bonnie, will the website be updated on states that have accepted the new scoring?
Yes. This is Daphne. Yes, yes, they're actually, if you take a look at the educator FAQs, there is a link there is a link in one of the FAQs that if you click it, it will take you to a current roster of the states and who has actually accepted the recommendation and who is still in the discussion or consideration phase. So we keep that up to date. That has been updated a couple of times since the January 26th announcement, and it will continue to be updated as we receive information from the impacted states.
Wonderful. Thanks, Daphne. I did have a number of questions come in about refunds, and they did give an example. For example, if the student got paid and took the test between January 1st, 2014 and January 26th, 2016, if they took the math test and got a 148 and then took it again and received a 145, will they receive a refund?
You want me to take that?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sure, certainly. The decision has been made. There will be no refunding of testing fees. We understand that some students may have failed and they have retaken the test. One of the points to that is you have to remember that every test taker had 2 either free or reduced retakes, depending on whether or not the state had provided accepted compensation to the testing centers. So even in the instances where a retake was taken, the money that they paid either went to the test center, the local test center for compensation, or to the state's administrative fees. And we as an organization don't have the right to go and ask either a local testing center or a state to refund money to a test taker.
That's great. Thanks, Debbie. I believe that answers that question. The next question was someone who works in a correctional facility, and she wanted to know if her learners qualify for college credit.
Absolutely. This has to do with the score the test taker makes on the test. If they are in that range for college plus credit, it doesn't matter who or where they took the test. It has to do with the score they make on the test.
Okay, I did have a few questions about the social studies and if it will later include short answer questions.
Okay, is the question about social studies?
I think what they mean is
I'm not sure what the question is.
If in the future it will include short answer questions.
All we can tell you is these are the decisions that have been made about the constructed response in social studies. As far as any other changes down the line, we have not looked at other changes at this point. Certainly all we have information on are the change to the social studies constructed response.
Yep.
Okay, and then I did have one question here about if there will be any more score level changes in the future.
Well, that's a really great
If I had a magic crystal ball.
If we had a crystal ball, we certainly could predict that. I think that part of what I presented at the early part of the webinar was the fact that we looked at a lot of data to implement the changes that were recommended and are going to be implemented. One of the amazing and fantastic things about the program, the way the program has evolved, is that we have access to a ton of real-time information in ways that the earlier incarnation of the GED program, we just didn't have data that way. If an item in the older series, if an item was misbehaving, i.e. not measuring what it was constructed to measure, we often didn't know that for years because of the way the information came in. And by the time we found it out, it was usually time for us to introduce a new series. So that's an answer to why in the past there weren't changes like this, because we didn't have access to a flow of information that allowed us to make changes like this.
Yeah, Daphne, I think another answer to the question is what you're seeing here is the commitment that Martin Kay and the assessment people made from the beginning of the test, that we would always be reviewing data, monitoring and assessing, and at the point that we saw evidence that there was a need for a change, we certainly would come back and act on it. And I guess that's where we are now. This was 18 months of data and review to be confident that it was the time to act on what we were seeing. All we can say is we have the same commitment moving forward, that anything we see, but as you can tell, it takes a number of months before anything would show up. I would think nobody has any expectation in the near future, but none of us have a crystal ball. But you have a commitment that should those kind of considerations be needed, we will be making those determinations.
Okay, great. A few more questions that are coming in. One of them is, will credits be retroactive from 2014?
Will what be retroactive?
I think they're talking about the credits.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that we're not looking retroactive. First of all, let's go back to the idea that the credit is a recommendation, not a given. And so I think we have to make sure that we're looking at the recommendation that has come out and what it's by those scores. So if a student took a test 2 years ago and scored at a certain level, does that guarantee that they go into college and receive credit for that? There is no guarantee. That has to be an institutional decision. And Debbie or Daphne, I think maybe one of you can answer about what date that recommendation rolled out from the ACE credit recommendation.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's something Daphne and I probably need to go back and have a discussion. The ACE credit recommendation on the reevaluation did not occur until late in 2015. So I don't know that there is anything about being retroactive, because we just received the external review from the ACE program in 2015. But it's a question we can certainly ask, because I can't tell you I know it, yes or no. Daphne,
no, I would agree. No, I would agree with that. I think that it's a brand new it's a brand new recommendation, and was not enforced then, but certainly we can follow up on that particular question. And as I indicated, there will be a lot more information about the ACE credit recommendation and how that will actually work later on in March. So stay tuned.
So we will add that to the list of things that needs to be addressed as more information becomes available.
Yeah.
Okay, Bonnie and Susan, were there any questions that you wanted to bring up that came in on your end?
There was just a couple of things.
Yes.
that if you don't mind, there's one in here that I want to make sure the 145 passing score is retroactive back to January 1 of 2014. Now, states have to individually approve that, but at the same time, most of the states that have already gone through the approval process and changed the score, they've already done that retroactive. So there seemed to be some misunderstanding that the student had to have scored 145 after January 1, 2016. It actually, the recommendation is back to 2014.
14, correct. The entire length of the series.
Yes.
A couple questions a little bit different. One of them is just to make sure GED Ready will also delete the Social Studies Extended Response as of March 1st. Am I correct?
I believe that is correct.
Yes.
Yes, I think so. The GED Ready and the GED operational test.
The other thing is there was a statistical report from GDTS that got posted for 2015. Will another one come out for 2015?
Well, actually, the one that came out in 15 was actually for 14. It was not, the 15 one has not been published yet, and it should be published in the next, probably couple of months. And it will, we'll obviously have to make some adjustments in the reporting, which is why once we knew that we were going to move forward with the recommendation, why the statistical report was not actually published. It's easier not to have to retract it.
There are also a couple questions on will these materials be in Spanish? That's one question. Another question is will the GED test ever come out again in French or other languages?
Well, okay, so I'll take that. I'll take that one.
Okay.
Well, as far as the other languages, those of you on the line that are familiar with assessment development probably also understand how much work is entailed in offering a valid assessment in another language. It is not simply a matter of translating the test and the items into whatever the target language is. That you also are infusing the assessment with the cultural context as well. So that being said, even coming up with a priority list of what languages we would develop in would be well nigh to impossible, because depending on what region of the country you're in, you may be inclined towards this, and another region of the country would want something else. So even trying to do that would be well nigh to impossible. So the answer is probably in the short term, probably not. The French test actually was not designed to be offered in the United States. It was actually a Canadian test. The Canadians actually do use the GED test as well. So it is not offered because it was a Canadian test, and when we rolled over into the 2014 test, it simply was no longer offered here. Quite honestly, it was a Canadian test both in Canadian French and Canadian context in terms of the cultural context. So it really did not have a place in our testing program.
And since we're talking about other languages, can a student take two exams, two operational versions of the exam in English and the other two in Spanish?
It depends on the state's regulations about that. There are every state, mandates, what is and is not allowable. You can check the state policy pages on GEDtestingservice.com because those are kept up to date. They are monitored by the state testing program personnel. That would be your best, source of truth in terms of what is and is not acceptable. There are some states that do prohibit mixing and matching, and then there are others that may not. Your best source of information, again, would be on the state policy pages, which can be accessed from the educator part of the website.
And Bonnie, while we're talking here, I'd like to put a little plug in because I've noticed a couple of questions that came in about, stats and reports and those types of things. Please make sure that you check out all the research that is on the GED Testing Service website. They're constantly including information there that talks about a host of different issues related to the GED and students as they move on from the GED test on into other things. So, there's lots of teacher resources that are there to handle many different things, but don't forget the research. I think you'll find the information there to be very enlightening and something that you'll appreciate going back to at different times because they do a wonderful job with it.
And Bonnie, there was actually one more question that came in on that. Do we know what percentage of students are passing at the 145 level now for the first time that they take the test?
When I can, this is Debbie, and the analogy I have used and what I have heard explained that I think is easiest for adult educators and GED administrators to kind of wrap their heads around, we have always talked about in the past what percentage of graduating seniors would pass the test and what percentage would not pass the test. And in the past, it had been about a 60-40 split. 60% of graduating seniors would pass, 40% would not. With the more inclusive score down to 145, we now see approximately 70% of graduating seniors would be passing the test. 30% of graduating seniors would still be unable to pass the test. So that may be a different way of answering your question, but as educators who have had a history with the test, those numbers sometimes seem to resonate a little better in their understanding of how this may have been more inclusive and allowed a wider range of high school graduates, similar to high school graduation, to earn a credential.
And Debbie, as I read this question of asking what percent of students are passing at the 145 level the first time they take the test, I would think that we don't have enough data to really give an accurate answer to that yet, since the 145 right now is not in place everywhere. And again, it's just been a very short turnaround time to really pull that stat. Would I be correct in assuming that?
Sure, that's just something that it may be possible to glean, but it's not something I could pull off the top of my head at this point in time.
I'm seeing a couple of other things that have popped into being. One of those is coming from an individual who asked about whether or not if a student scores in that 175 to 200 range, will they be sent a link where they can download that expanded transcript? And yes, all of those different pieces will be there. I mean, students are going to be getting information from My GED with their scores and their score reports that are coming through. So please know that all of those different pieces are in the works, and as we move into March and a lot of the programming pieces are finished and everything is updated, students are going to have a lot of information available to them. So just make sure that as you're watching as students are watching for their scores to come back and get that information. So I think as we get into March, and as Daphne said earlier, there will be a lot more information coming out on the College Ready and the College Ready Plus credit. I think many of the concerns that I'm seeing from different people, that those will be alleviated as you see that additional information coming out. And Bonnie, could you very quickly just go to the next slide in the PowerPoint itself? One thing we want to make sure that everyone is doing as we're looking at this is, where do I find information? And notice that this website, this particular slide really points out so much information that is available. And if you look under additional, it says state-specific information. So there's a way for you to go in, all of you who are concerned about, what's going on with my state or my neighboring state or where my sister lives. Anyway, you can find out information from that particular site itself.
And also want to call attention to the FAQ for educators and FAQ for students. Under Learn More with our FAQs, a lot of questions are answered, are definitely answered there as well. Under additional information, the document that you received today as part of the webinar it's the GED Test Performance Standards technical document. If you lose sight of the download that you got from us today, you can always come back to the website and re-download the document from this page.
And Susan, it appears there continue to be a lot of questions on statistics, et cetera, and GED Testing Service has, honed many statistics. Yes, they do know what percentage of students scored between, that 145 and that 149 since the test began. The answer that we were talking about is how many have gotten that 145 to get their credential right now, which is a new thing. But there again, even with the information of how this test was calibrated or normed initially, that information is on GED Testing Service. There are so many reports there. So some of those things, please, if you did not get a specific answer or can't find things, we will provide you with an email at the end of this webinar so that you can focus on where some of that information is.
And as one last, let me get a plug in here as a history major, and there is a question in here about has the removal of the social studies extended response affected the focus of the, quote, great American conversation? And no, it has not, because you have to please keep in mind that, yes, the extended response went back and it was actually asking students to identify that enduring issue and show connections. However, 50% of this test, social studies, is about civics and government. Civics and government and U.S. history is the great American conversation, and it also is about enduring issues and those documents which are the basis of our government itself. So please, as I put my plug in out there, please, keep in mind that our students need that, not just for having done an extended response in the past, but they need it for the rest of the test. But more importantly, it's about students having that understanding so as they go in life, they're more able to participate in their own community and in all of the civic responsibilities that they have. So that would just be my little plug as the social studies person sitting over here, my little plug to make sure that that we don't give up on doing many of the different things within there.
Well, Susan, that was a great plug, and it also brings up another issue, which is that we don't want people to believe that the various parts of the content area tests are completely disassociated from one another. that, you know, to your point about knowing and integrating some of the multiple choice questions and the other items that are part of social studies require the same kinds of skills that we ask people to bring to the social studies extended response. And ditto for the RLA extended response. The same kinds of things that we're asking people to do in one integrated item are the same kinds of things that we're asking with some of the multiple choice items. So don't lose sight of that. And I'm adding my plug to Susan's plug that don't stop what you're doing, because those skill levels, regardless of whether there's an extended response in social studies, those skills are still important in the social studies context.
Absolutely. And I know we're about to run out of time here, but I always, if we have a question about accommodations, please make sure that if students need accommodations, if they have learning disabilities or physical disabilities, make sure that that they request those accommodations, and there is a way for them to do that through My GED. But also, you need to, as an instructor or a program manager, make yourself familiar with some of the requirements and things. And again, the GED Testing Service website is your one stop for all things GED, and that includes accommodations. So if you'll just take a look on the GED Testing Service website, you can find out a lot of information regarding that. Likewise, you can find out a lot more information, again, back to the recalibration and other areas as well. So stay posted.
Definitely, as we're looking, I do know there are a number of questions about publishers, and I have no doubt that there will be things that will get changed in their materials. That, of course, is not per se under the auspices of GED Testing Service, but just realize that they have also been communicated with throughout all of these recalibration, the recalibration process, etc. So I would have no doubt that we will see some differences, but there again, there's not a whole lot of change when we're looking at content. Yes, there's a deletion of a writing sample, but the social studies test is going to still assess those skills of those 4 content areas, and I think that's real important for us to remember, that as we go through, content is still content. It is college and career readiness content as we go through. So, having said that, again, as we go forward, there will be many things that will be discussed. We've talked a little bit about the documents. We've talked about the performance level descriptors. And we're going to catch up with things.
Yeah, there is one thing, Bonnie, and we just had a couple quick questions come in about all of that norming process, and I'm just going to reiterate one more time some of the things that you said earlier, but if you will, for those of you who have concerns about that, the document that you have now, the GED Test Performance Standards, if you will read in that startup, it talks about setting the initial performance standards, how the things have changed. So that document should give you all of the information that you'll need in order to address those questions. So just as a review.
And Susan, and I know our time is short, but yes, you need to take a look at the technical report. And in our discussions, we reminded people that, yes, there was a norming study that was done in 2013, and we accurately set our standards, set our scores based upon the information we had on that. Because it is a computer-based test, we have the luxury of being able to track longitudinally student outcome data. And it was the pairing and the review of both the norming study and then what we could glean, because it was a computer-based test, from student outcomes and longitudinal studies and data matches that was then combined with what we knew in the norming study to move forward with these recommendations. And I think if you read the technical report, they'll have an understanding of that.
Thanks, Debbie. And for those of you, before we close out with you today, who do need a certificate for attending, please note that you're going to be receiving a follow-up email from GEDTS, and there will be a link there that you can download a certificate of completion for attendance here. I know for many of us that's extremely important. So, in our last moment, we are going to look forward to 2016 as we add new Tuesday for Teachers webinars, so stay tuned. If I'm not mistaken, Susan, I think we're going to do some more math in the next couple webinars because it does seem to continue to be a problem. And so just know that there'll be more professional development resources and continued updates as we go forward. So I see that our time has run out. So, Susan, any other things that you'd like to share before we turn it over to Daphne and Debbie?
Just thank you, everyone, for being here and your questions, and for all you do for all our adult learners out there.
Daphne?
Yes, I want to thank everybody who came, and we'll see you on the road. We have an active, we'll be active in a lot of national conferences as well as state meetings this spring. Hope to have a chance to meet you all personally, you know, at one of those venues. And we certainly will be, like Bonnie and Susan said, we'll be continuing the webinar series. So at the very least, we'll meet virtually. So thanks again for coming.
Debbie.
Oh, our time is up. I'm happy to have all of you here. Look forward to next time. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, guys, and we will see you next month.